the next component I want to talk about is the MicroProfile Rest Client. So there's a very, very common problem in XPages, which is that you want to read a remote service of some kind. There are a couple ways to go about doing that. You could use Lotus-script to do get and put and post operations, but that's very low level. It's also Lotus-script, but it's also just, they're like HTTP primitives. You can
Don't be
also
trashing the script.
I'm not trashing, like every language should have that, and I'm glad that Lotus-script finally does. It's very good for them. Uh, but uh, Java, much like with JSON, Java until Java 9 didn't have a standardized like good HTTP client. Like you had URL connection, and so a lot of people have probably run into this, especially for a good couple of years in there. You probably fought with it when it comes to TLS. But that is Java's, it's not the most primitive, but it's very low primitive level of dealing with REST services. It works, it can get the job done, but usually what would end up happening is you would either you would build on top of that, or you would try to grab an existing library. You would try to grab an existing library, like a vendor says, here's the Java bindings for our API. You would put that into XPages. You would get something that says that you're not allowed to do reflection because it was using Jackson for JSON, and now that won't work, etc. But if you weren't, you were just kind of stuck writing your own kind of thing, and there were no great options. I think the Social Business Toolkit had some stuff that will help a little bit with that and would handle some of the JSON stuff, but I never really used it. But the MicroProfile Rest Client blows all that out of the water. So all the stuff about primitives and like doing the method calls yourself and dealing with all that, forget it all. So here, the way the MicroProfile Rest Client works is that it uses the same kind of annotations we saw earlier with JAX-RS to define here's what the endpoint is. So for example, here I'm saying that this interface represents a remote REST service. It has a method where I can call get. It will produce some JSON, and I want that deserialized or bound back into this object. This can get much more complex. So you could say it will take this header parameter for example, your token. Like if you need to send a JWT along with it, you could say header param, authorization, you pass bearer or whatever, or customize header. You can pass form parameters, you can pass query parameters, all the stuff that you do in JAX-RS incoming, this lets you do outgoing. And you write an interface that says, this represents my remote REST service that I want to call. And then you would say, I want to build a URI. So you would have, HTTPS somevendor.com/API. That's your baseline. And then you would say, I want to build a REST client builder from that API, from that base URL with this. And then you just call the method. So I called this get here. That's unrelated to the fact that it's get HTTP. It could be open JSON example object, and that doesn't matter. So what it's doing is, all I do is I call this method, which you'll note I didn't write any code for other than the interface. Like I don't have to say, when you do this, make a new URL connection, open the connection, get the content, check for an error, handle doing this, take the JSON.
Process response.
Yeah. So all I'm doing is say, I want to reach this remote service. I have already told you that I expected to produce JSON. I could have put in, here are the header parameters that I'm going to put in, which will then be just Java arguments. Here are the query parameters that should go over there. So, for example, I have a service I use for checking whether an incoming comment is spam. It's a very imperfect service, but it mostly works. But that's the sort of thing where they just have a URL that says check. And so what I do is I write a method called check, and I handle all the parameters. Like this one's my header parameter, which is my API key. Here are the query parameters, which is the details of the thing. And then it just handles turning that into a request. I forget if it's a post or not. Again, doesn't matter, because all I'm doing is calling the method. So I've defined this, and then this just lets me handle that. This handles all of the to and from JSON. So for example, if I'm posting JSON to something, I could have an object that represents that JSON, write that object, post that there. It will handle turning it in JSON, getting the response. It all does this for you. So that whole category of stuff where you have to call a URL and it's difficult and the old Java way is weird, even with a nicer client, like if you had Apache HTTP client, it's still more primitive, where you're still writing the connection and say, give me the entity as this, or make the, I'm specifically doing a get, I'm doing a post. add this header, add this. Whereas here, much like incoming for REST services, now you do outgoing with the same exact syntax. These are the same annotations. These are the same rules. It's using a lot of the same stuff internally, but now you can do it in a very Java way. So you can imagine a much more complex thing than just get for this. Like if it had 50 methods, you'd write them out. If there isn't already, there probably will at some point be a builder where you take an open API spec and turn it into MicroProfile interfaces, and then there you go. This all connects. So like if you were writing this and somebody else was using MicroProfile on the other side, or they can be using other things, but like you can see this flow connecting together where you have, this is the remote service I want to use. Now build me a client using this nice API for doing it, and it will be able to generate that stuff for you.
Really?
That is not in here, but that's just like the sort of thing that you could imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, worst case, I guess I could do that at some point. I have all the pieces, but that sort of thing where you would want to, you know, you are connecting to this remote service in a way that is now extremely Java friendly. So like here, all I'm doing is calling get, but internally it's handling the connection. It's making sure that it's, you know, if it's SSL, everything checks out there. You can do things like say, I want to have special, like all, you know, there are all the things about like, I want to do special SSL handling. I want to do X, Y, or Z. You can handle all that. There are much more configuration options you can have here, but it does all that work. It does the connection. It does bring it back. And so this is meant to basically take that problem out of your hands and just say, all I want to do is define, here's what I'm connecting to, let the system handle the rest. I don't care about the plumbing. I don't care what version of HTTP client it uses. I don't care what implementation it uses. I don't care about any of that. All I care about is this is the remote service. This is what I want back. Call it.
Wow.